I died with my face pressed against cold stone, and the last thing I heard was my brother's voice, calm, almost bored, saying, "Clean this up." Not "forgive me," not even goodbye, just "clean this up." Like I was a spilled drink, like 26 years meant nothing. My name is Kale, second son of the Ashford dynasty, not the heir, not the spare, just the one in the middle who trained hard and asked for nothing. I was loyal, capable, the kind of man people called reliable, which I've learned is just a polite way of saying easy to use. And my brother Darian used me better than anyone. For 3 years I fought his wars, cleaned up his messes, protected him from threats he never even knew existed. I believed in him, genuinely, completely, trusted him with my life without a second thought. That was my only real mistake, and it cost me everything. Because on the night our father's will was finally read, the night everything changed, Darian had already decided, long before that night. There were 4 men waiting for me in that room. Not enemies, people I had trained with, people I had bled beside, people I had saved. One of them looked me in the eye as I walked in. He didn't warn me, he didn't flinch. He just stepped aside to give the others a clear angle. That one small, deliberate step has stayed with me longer than the blade itself, longer than the pain, longer than anything else from that night. I fought. I took down 2 of them before the third got behind me. I remember the sound more than the pain, a dull thud, then warmth spreading fast across my back. Then the floor came up very fast. Then I lay there and listened to them leave, one by one, footsteps fading down the corridor. Then silence, then nothing. The first sensation was heat. Not the gentle kind, not sunlight, the kind that lives inside a furnace, the kind that should be killing me. I tried to breathe. Something moved, enormous, heavy. And I realized with complete confusion that it wasn't my lungs moving. It was wings. I opened my eyes. Everything was fire. Not around me. Me. I was the fire. Flames ran across my feathers like water, like they were alive, like they were happy. I tried to scream. What came out rattled the entire mountain. A sound like 1,000 birds shrieking at once, sharp and ancient and absolutely not human. My wings snapped open on pure instinct, and I launched straight up and immediately crashed into a cliff face. Rock exploded. I tumbled, caught air, crashed again. 3 trees, gone. I lay in the wreckage and stared at the sky and tried to understand what had just happened to my body, my life, my everything. My wingspan was wider than a house. My talons were like curved swords dug into the earth. Every feather glowed, deep amber at the base, white hot at the tips. Even lying completely still, heat rippled off me in visible waves. I was magnificent. I was also completely terrified and had no idea what I was doing. A deer appeared at the tree line 20 meters away. We stared at each other. It looked at the 3 destroyed trees. It looked at me. Then it ran, like it had made a very important life decision. Smart deer. Honestly, that deer understood the situation better than I did at that moment. At least one of us had good instincts. I stayed in that crater for a long time, running through everything I knew about phoenixes. Immortal. Reborn from death. Creatures of pure flame, nearly impossible to kill. But the legends never mentioned. A newly reborn phoenix has absolutely no control over any of it. I sneezed, set a bush on fire. I shifted my weight, melted a section of rock. I tried to fold my wings and accidentally launched a column of flame 30 meters into the sky. The whole first day was a series of increasingly alarming disasters. By nightfall, I had reduced the uncontrolled burning to occasional sparks. I called that a victory and tried not to think too hard about my own standards. I found a river and stood at the edge, looking at my reflection for the first time. The phoenix staring back at me was broad, powerful, radiating light, even in the dusk. It also had singed feathers in 3 places, and the wide, confused eyes of someone who had just woken up in the completely wrong body. I looked like a phoenix on its worst day ever, which, to be fair, was completely accurate. I was a phoenix having the worst week of its life, and I had no one to blame but my brother. Here is what I knew. I was dead, murdered by my brother and 4 men I trusted. Here is what I didn't know. Where I was, how much time had passed, or what world this was. The forest around me was ancient. No roads, no distant sounds of cities. Stars overhead that didn't quite match the ones I remembered. Different world, possibly different era. I should have been devastated. Instead, something unexpected settled in my chest. Quiet and steady and cold. Not rage, not grief. Something more focused than either. Purpose, cold, clear, absolute. The kind that doesn't shake and doesn't ask permission and doesn't care how long it takes to finish. Darian thought he had ended something that night. He thought he had removed an obstacle and secured his future. What he actually did was remove every reason I had to hold back. When I was human, I loved him. I protected him. I made myself smaller so he could be larger. I gave him everything. That version of me died on that stone floor. What came back doesn't have a brother. What came back doesn't have loyalty or mercy or love anymore. What came back has one single target. I spread my wings, carefully this time, and pushed off the riverbank. I rose over the trees, over the ridgeline, into open sky. The air at altitude was cold and thin, and the wind hit my wings like a wall. But something in my body knew exactly what to do. For the first time since waking up, I didn't crash. I circled upward on a thermal, higher and higher, until the forest below was a dark mass and the mountains were ridges of shadow and the horizon curved at the edge of the world. From up here, the fire in my chest didn't feel like destruction. It felt like the answer to a question I hadn't known I was asking for 26 years. I had been reborn for a reason. I didn't care what the reason was. All that mattered, somewhere below, Darren was sitting on a throne that was never his. And when I finally crossed back into that throne room, when he saw exactly what he had made, he was going to wish he had buried me deeper. The next few days were an education in humility. A phoenix is not born knowing how to be a phoenix. I say this as a phoenix who learned it the hard way. The flight took longer. My human brain kept overriding every instinct. My body knew how to fly. My mind kept asking questions like, but what if we fall, and are we sure about this angle? By day 3, I could cross a mountain range without crashing. I considered this a major personal achievement and refused to let anyone diminish it. What I couldn't control was the fire in my chest. It wasn't just heat, it was something older, pulsing with its own rhythm, separate from my heartbeat, saying something I couldn't quite hear. On the 5th day, I found people. A small village in a valley, smoke rising from chimneys, animals and hammering metal, and all the ordinary sounds of lives being lived. I landed in the hills above and watched from a distance. They were human. Or close enough. One of the children in the field looked up and saw me and pointed. In 10 seconds, the entire village was looking at the hillside. In 20, half of them were running. I did not take it personally. What I hadn't expected was the other half, the ones who didn't run. They knelt, all at once, like something had cut their legs from under them. Old men, women, farmers, still holding their tools. I stood on that hillside and felt something I didn't know how to name. I had been a second son, a trusted weapon, a disposable piece. Nobody had ever knelt for me. I didn't fully understand it then. I would, later. But something clicked into place in that moment. Not arrogance, not hunger for power, just clarity about what I was now, not just a dead man who came back angry, something that could change things, something that could burn the old world down and build something different in the ash. I spread my wings and rose off the hillside without a sound. The people below watched me go. I didn't look back. I had a direction now, not just revenge, something larger. But I had time. That's the thing about phoenixes that the legends always get right. We have all the time in the world. On the 7th day, something found me. I was wedged into a cliff face above the snow line, using the rock as insulation against my own heat, when a sound woke me. Not loud, barely a whisper above the wind. But the fire in my chest reacted before my mind did. I was on my feet and fully alert in under a second. Below me, picking its way up the rock face, was a creature I had no name for. Roughly the shape of a large cat, but the proportions were wrong. Too long, too fluid. Its eyes were old silver. It stopped 30 meters below, sat down calmly like it had planned this visit for weeks. Then it spoke. Not in my language, but I understood. "You're new," it said. "Very new. You don't even know what you are yet." I stared. It tilted its head. "Do you want to?" I had 15 questions I could have led with. I picked the one that mattered. "Is there a way back to my world?" The creature was quiet for a long moment. "There are ways to many worlds," it said. "Whether yours is among them depends on what you're willing to become." Then it turned. "Follow me, or don't. But you'll burn this mountain down if you stay." I looked at the scorched rock around me. I looked at the 3 craters I had made just sleeping. Then I looked at the creature moving down the cliff. Fair point. I followed. Its name, as best I could translate, was something like Sable. It had been alive a very long time. Long enough to have met other phoenixes, though it made clear I was unusual. "Most phoenixes don't remember their past lives this clearly," it said as we moved through a canyon it knew well. "Most are born, not reborn. You carried something through the fire." "Your purpose," it said when I answered, "my memories." I glanced back at me. "Which is more dangerous?" I didn't argue. A phoenix born without purpose is just a natural disaster. A phoenix with a human mind and a specific reason to act is something different. Something harder to predict, harder to stop, something that keeps its enemies up at night. Sable led me to a basin hidden deep in the mountains. Black ancient rock, air that tasted like lightning. Other creatures had gathered there, watching, waiting to see what I was. "They want to know what you are," Sable said. "So do I," said. "You're a weapon," it replied simply. "The question is whether you'll learn to aim yourself before you go off." I looked at the gathered creatures, at the ancient black rock, at the fire under my feathers. I thought about Darien, about that one man who stepped aside to give the others a clear angle. "How long will it take?" I asked. "To learn to aim." Sable looked up at me with those silver eyes. "That depends entirely on how fast you're willing to burn." The fire in my chest pulsed once, twice, then settled into something steady and absolute. "Fast," I said, and meant it. "Then we start now," Sable replied, and turned. I burned through 3 teachers in the first 2 weeks. Not because I was difficult. I was actually an excellent student. It was more that the training kept accidentally setting things on fire. By the end of week 2, I had learned 3 things with absolute certainty. First, my power was much larger than I understood. Second, my control over it was much smaller than I needed. Third, and most important, Darien had no idea what was coming for him. He thought he had killed a man. What he had actually done was create something that had never existed before. A phoenix who remembered everything, who had reasons, who had a plan, who was getting better at this every single day and had no intention of stopping until he was done. The training was brutal. Good? I wanted brutal. Brutal meant faster. Faster meant sooner. And sooner meant I was one day closer to the only thing that actually mattered. The sooner I was ready, the sooner I could look Darien in the eye and let him understand, in his last moments, exactly what his one act of betrayal had truly cost him. I thought about that moment every night when I finally stopped and let the fire settle in my chest. I didn't let it make me careless. I didn't let it make me rush. I let it make me patient. The best revenge isn't fast. The best revenge is when they see it coming and can't stop it. When they realize it's inevitable. When they understand fully and completely what they caused. I was going to be the last thing he ever saw. And I would make sure he had plenty of time, in those final moments, to think about every choice that led him there. I settled into the black rock basin under a sky full of unfamiliar stars, closed my eyes and let the fire breathe. Steady, patient, building. Day by day, week by week. Building into something the legends had no name for yet. Something that had never existed before. Something my brother had no way to prepare for. If someone betrayed you the way Darien betrayed Kale, would you burn everything down fast? Or take your time and make it count? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know. 3 weeks into training, Sable told me something I didn't want to hear. You're holding back, it said. Every time the fire wants to go further, you pull it. I didn't deny it, because it was true. Every time the power in my chest started building past a certain point, something in me flinched, something human. You're afraid of what you'll become if you let go completely? Sable said. It wasn't a question. It sat across from me in the black rock basin and watched me with those silver eyes. I thought about denying it. Then I thought about the column of flame I had accidentally launched on day one, about the way the fire felt when it moved without permission. It doesn't feel like me, I said finally. When it goes that far, it feels like something else is running the body and I'm just watching from inside. Sable was quiet for a moment, and then it said, That's because you still think you're a man who became a phoenix. You're not. You're a phoenix who remembers being a man. I sat with that for a long time. A man who became a phoenix fights himself forever. The difference felt small when Sable said it. It wasn't small at all. A man who became a phoenix would always be fighting himself. Human instincts against something ancient and vast. Always pulling back. Always afraid of his own power. A phoenix who remembered being a man had something different. A human mind inside a fire that had been burning since before cities existed. Not a limitation. A weapon. So what do I do with that? I asked. Sable tilted its head. Stop apologizing to your own power, it said. It isn't going to hurt you. It's trying to protect you. The next morning I tried something different. Instead of controlling the fire, instead of managing it, directing it, keeping it inside acceptable limits, I just let it talk. Not outward, not a burst or a column or a wave, just inward. I sat in the basin and opened the channel and let the fire say whatever it had been trying to say since I woke up. What I felt when I finally stopped fighting and just listened when I let the fire speak was not what I expected. Not even close. It wasn't rage. It wasn't destruction. It was something much older than either of those things, and it had a direction, clear and certain as a compass needle, pointing somewhere I couldn't yet name. By the end of week 4, the other creatures in the basin had stopped treating me like a curiosity. That was either progress or a warning sign. I chose to believe it was progress. There was a creature called Thresh, shaped like a very large boar, made almost entirely of layered stone, with the personality of someone who had lost patience several centuries ago. Thresh did not like phoenixes. He made this clear on the first day by walking directly toward me and stopping 3 inches from my face and staring at me for a full minute. I didn't move. I had fought 4 armed men in a room with no exit. I was not going to be intimidated by a rock boar with opinions. After the minute was up, Thresh made a sound like 2 boulders grinding together, which I later learned was laughter, and walked away. We had reached an understanding. There was also a creature called Ven, luminous, slow-moving, shaped like nothing I had a word for, who communicated exclusively in emotions rather than language. Ven's emotional range was extraordinary. I could feel it from 30 meters away. Curiosity, ancient sadness, sharp amusement, and a steady affection for everything around it. Being near Ven was like standing next to someone who had made peace with every hard thing in their life and wanted nothing from you except your presence. I was not used to that. What I learned from these creatures, from all of them over those weeks, was not technique. It was scale, the scale of what existed in this world and what I was now part of. I had grown up in a dynasty. I knew power. Political power, military power, the kind measured in soldiers and gold and favors owed. What I was learning now was a different kind entirely, the kind that had been here long before anyone thought to build a throne. On day 31, Sable brought me to a place I hadn't been before, higher in the mountains, past the snowline, where the air was so thin I could feel even my fire-sustained lungs working harder. At the top of a sheer face of black glass rock, volcanic, ancient, polished by 10,000 years of wind, there was a plateau. And on the plateau, something was waiting. A phoenix. but not like me. Where my fire was amber and gold, this one burned deep red shading to black at the wingtips. Older? Heavier? The kind of old that has physical weight? Where my fire was amber and gold and white, this one was deep red, shading into black at the wingtips. Enormous, larger than me by a third, and old. The kind of old that has weight to it. It looked at me the way very experienced people look at beginners. Not unkindly, but with a complete and total awareness of exactly how much I didn't know yet. Ash, Sable said, which I understood was the creature's name, or the closest thing to a name it used. This is the one I told you about. Ash regarded me in silence for a very long moment. Then it said, in a voice that felt like it came from somewhere underground, "You remember your death?" "Yes," I said. There was no point in anything else. It had clearly already known before it asked. I had the impression Ash rarely asked questions it didn't already know the answer to. "And you came back with the memory intact?" It wasn't a question. That hasn't happened in a very long time. The last one who came back that way. It paused. Changed things considerably. "What things?" I asked. Ash held my gaze for a long moment, steady and unhurried. "Everything," it said. And somehow that single word carried the full weight of centuries behind it. I didn't know what to do with that. I filed it under questions to revisit later and moved on. "Can you teach me?" I asked. Ash was quiet for a long moment. Then it said, "I can show you what you are. Whether you learn from it depends entirely on you." What Ash showed me over the next 2 weeks was not what I expected. I had assumed it would be combat, fire control, how to aim what I was carrying. Instead, Ash showed me memory, its own memory, centuries of it, places, creatures, events, the slow grinding movement of this world through time and all the things that had changed it. It showed me by proximity, standing close and letting its presence wash over me, images and emotions and the weight of lived experience flowing like water through old channels. I saw empires rise and collapse. I saw the same kinds of men, hungry, certain, convinced their version of power deserved to last, making the exact same mistakes across centuries. I saw what happened to all of them eventually, without exception. Some faster, some slower, some dramatically, some in quiet rooms with no witnesses, but every single one the same way. Every single one of them, without exception, ended the same way. Some faster, some slower, some dramatically, some in quiet rooms with no witnesses, but the same way. The world corrected itself, always. Not from malice, not from justice, just from the physics of things that couldn't hold their own weight forever, eventually coming down. I watched this for hours the first day, and then sat for a very long time afterward in the thin, cold air of the plateau and thought about my brother. Darian thought he had secured something permanent, a throne, a future, a story where he was the main character and everyone else was either useful or removed. He had no idea that the world had been ending stories like that for as long as there had been stories. He had no idea what he had set in motion the night he had me killed. I wasn't just coming back. I was coming back as something the world used to correct exactly this kind of mistake. That thought settled into me the same way the fire had. Quietly, completely, without asking for permission. Steady and warm and absolute in a way that felt like truth. On the 42nd day, I asked Ash the question I had been building toward for weeks. How do I get back to my world? Ash looked at me for a long moment before answering. Why? It asked, not skeptically, not as a test. Genuinely curious, like the answer actually mattered to it. Because my brother is sitting on a throne he built on my blood, I said. And because there are people under that throne who deserve better than what he's going to give them. Ash regarded me steadily. The second reason, it said, that's the one that matters. The first one is just anger. The first reason is what gets me out of bed, I said. The second reason is what I'll actually do when I get there. They're not the same thing. Something shifted in Ash's expression, subtle, barely visible. Something that might have been approval. Honest answer, it said. There is a crossing, Ash said finally, but it only works in one direction. Once you go back, you cannot return here. It paused, and the crossing will cost you. Cost me what? Something you haven't identified yet, Ash said. Something you're still carrying from your human life. When you know what it is, you'll be ready to cross. I thought about that for a long time after. What was I still carrying? I had let go of the grief, or thought I had. The shock was long gone. The confusion about what I was, mostly resolved. What was I still carrying? Still holding so tightly I hadn't even noticed the weight of it? That question stayed with me longer than anything else, Ash said that day. I didn't have an answer, not yet. But the question had taken root, sitting just below the surface, waiting. Patient as everything in this world seemed to be except me. Training continued. By week 7, my control over the fire had changed so completely that the creature I had been in week 1 felt like a different person entirely. In week 1, I had set things on fire by sneezing. In week 7, I could hold a single flame the size of a candle steady in a high wind for an hour without it flickering. Precision and scale, Ash had told me early on. Any fire can burn. Only a disciplined fire can choose exactly what it burns and what it leaves untouched. That lesson took 3 weeks to understand and 2 more to apply. But once it clicked, everything changed. The fire stopped feeling managed and started feeling like a language I was learning. Thresh, who had warmed to me slightly over the weeks, which manifested as occasionally throwing rocks at me to test my reflexes instead of just staring, confirmed the change one afternoon. He walked over, looked at me for a moment, made the boulder grinding laugh sound, and said in his slow, grinding voice, "You stopped smelling like panic. It took long enough." High praise from Thresh. I accepted it graciously, which is to say I said thank you, and he threw a rock at me immediately to maintain the balance of our relationship. Ven, meanwhile, had begun broadcasting something new in my direction over the past week. Not the usual background warmth. Something more specific, more pointed. It took me several days to identify it. When I finally did, I sat very still for a moment. What Ven was projecting at me, with patient repetition, was the emotion of approaching readiness. Not, "You're ready?" Not yet. But the feeling of standing at the edge of a door that was about to open, and knowing, in the body, in the bones, that the moment was close. On day 53, I woke before dawn and sat in the basin alone and let myself do something I had been avoiding since day one. I let myself think about home, not about Darien, not about the throne or the betrayal or what I was going to do when I got back. Just home. The smell of the great hall in winter, the wood smoke and cold stone, the training yard at dawn, the ring of practice weapons, the rhythm of two people sparring who knew each other well. My father's study, books and old maps and the tea he drank every morning without fail. I had always hated that tea. The smell of it had always meant, without question, that I was safe. The kitchen crew that had fed me since I was 5 years old, who pretended not to notice when I showed up at odd hours looking for something to eat, and left extra out anyway. I'd been so certain I was carrying nothing but purpose. Clean, forward-facing, no weight dragging behind it. Just a target and a direction, and the fire to get there. But sitting in that basin before dawn, thinking about a smell of tea I'd always disliked, I found the thing I was still carrying. The thing Ash had said I hadn't identified yet. It wasn't anger, it wasn't grief, it wasn't even love exactly, though love was the closest word I had for it. It was something more specific and harder to name than any of those things. It was home. The simple, human, completely undramatic fact of belonging somewhere, of having a place that was yours. I'd lost that when Darien put a blade in my back. Not just a life, a place, a context. The specific version of the world where I made sense. I had been so focused on what I was going to take back that I hadn't let myself feel what had actually been taken from me. I sat with it. Didn't turn it into fuel or make it useful. Just felt the full weight of genuine, uncomplicated human grief until the sun came up over the Black Mountains. Then I stood. And I knew, not as a thought, not as a decision, but in the body, in the fire, in every part of me at once, that I had finally found what I was carrying. I walked to where Ash was watching the morning from the plateau edge. "I know what I'm carrying," I said. Ash looked at me. "I know," it said. "I've known for 2 weeks. I was waiting for you." "When can we go to the crossing?" "Tomorrow," Ash said. "Sleep tonight, eat well, say what you need to say to the ones here who matter." It paused. "The crossing is not gentle." I looked out over the mountains, this strange ancient world that had taken me in and remade me into something I was still only beginning to understand. "I'll be ready," I said. And for the first time since I woke up in flames on a foreign mountain with no idea what I was, I meant it completely. That evening, I found Sable at the canyon's edge, where it usually watched the sunset. It didn't say anything when I sat near it. Neither did I for a while. "And when I'm gone," I said finally, "will you—" I stopped. I didn't have the end of that sentence. Sable glanced at me. "We'll be here," it said. "We were here before. We'll be here after." Something about that was more comforting than it had any right to be. The simple permanence of it, the complete lack of drama. I nodded and didn't say anything else. Thresh found me later and threw one last rock. Small, practically gentle by his standards. I caught it and looked at him. He made the grinding laugh sound and walked away without looking back. Ven already knew. I could feel it from across the basin. Something warm and vast and certain, the emotional equivalent of, you were always going to be all right, even when you didn't know it. I lay in the basin one last time that night and let the fire breathe low and steady in my chest and thought about tomorrow, and thought about Darien, and thought about the smell of tea I never liked. Tomorrow the crossing. Tomorrow the direction I had been building toward since I opened my eyes in flames on a mountainside that felt like a second chance. Not a second chance at the same life I had lost. Something better than that. A first real chance at the life I should have been living all along, with nothing held back. What do you think Kale had to give up at the crossing to get back? Drop your guess in the comments. Some of you are going to be right, and I want to see who figures it out first. The crossing was not a door, not a gate or a portal. It was a crack in a cliff face about the width of my wingspan, and it smelled like lightning. Ash led me there at dawn. Sable walked behind me. Neither of them spoke the whole way up. That silence told me more about what was coming than anything they could have said. The crack in the rock pulsed, not visibly, but in the way I could feel the fire in my chest respond to it, leaning toward it the way a flame leans toward air, recognizing something. The crossing reads what you're carrying, Ash said, stopping a few meters back. Not your power, not your intentions, what you're holding in the parts of yourself you haven't looked at directly. And it takes it, I said. Ash looked at me. It trades, it said. What you give up permanently. What you gain, you'll understand when you're through. I stood at the edge and felt the fire pulling toward it like a tide. The thing I was carrying, that grief, that specific human loss of home, was right at the surface now. I had carried it for 53 days without naming it. Now I was about to hand it to a crack in a mountain and walk through whatever was left of me on the other side. Will I still remember them? I asked. Not Darian. The others. The kitchen crew. My father's study. The smell of tea I never liked. Ash was quiet for a moment. You'll remember the facts, it said. You'll know who they were, what they meant. But the feeling, the specific weight of it, that won't come back? It paused. That's what the crossing needs. I stood there for a moment longer than I needed to, not hesitating, just giving it proper acknowledgement, the way you acknowledge something real before you put it down. Then I looked at Ash one last time. It gave me nothing. No reassurance, no warning. Just those silver eyes, patient and steady. Then I walked forward into the crack. The crack was not wide enough for my wingspan. That didn't matter. The moment I moved into it, the world went sideways. Not dark, not bright, just sideways, like reality had tilted. The fire in my chest erupted. Not outward, inward, burning through me layer by layer. And I felt the thing being pulled loose. That specific warmth, that sense of belonging somewhere. And then it was gone. Clean as a cut. No pain. Just absence where something had been. Like reaching for something that was always in your pocket and finding the pocket empty. I came through the other side and stood on a mountainside I didn't recognize, and breathed cold air that tasted like the world I had been born in. I was back. Standing on a mountainside I didn't recognize yet, breathing cold air that tasted like the world I had been born in. The fire in my chest burned differently now. The first difference, I was smaller, not dramatically, but compared to what I had become, this body felt compact, contained, still enormous by any normal measure, but changed. The second difference, the fire burned colder here. Not weaker, colder, more precise, like the difference between a bonfire and a blade, both hot, not the same thing. The third difference took me a moment to name. I reached for the grief, the specific human ache of missing home. And it wasn't there. Ash had told me. I had understood it intellectually. Feeling the empty space where something had lived for 26 years was different from understanding it would be empty. I sat with that, didn't fight it, didn't fill it, just acknowledged it. The way you acknowledge an old injury that finally healed with something between relief and mourning. Then I stood up, spread my wings, and rose into a familiar sky. The cold air pushed up against me and I let it, climbing until the mountains below looked small and the horizon curved. I didn't know exactly where I was, but I could feel the direction the same way I had felt the crossing. In the fire, in the pull, pointing southeast like a needle. Home was southeast, Darian was southeast. The same pull that had led me to the crossing now pointed home without hesitation. The fire knew the direction. I followed it. I flew low over the tree line, reading the land, letting memory and instinct combine. 3 hours later I recognized a river bend, then a mountain profile, then the capital, then, just before sunset, the outline of the capital on the horizon, the towers of the Ashford fortress rising above the city like something that thought it was permanent. I landed in the hills above the city. Same hills where I had trained as a boy, running circuits before dawn because I was trying to be worthy of something I didn't know wasn't mine to earn. I looked at the city for a long time. Nothing about it had changed from the outside. Same walls, same towers, same smoke rising from 10,000 chimneys in the evening air. But I could feel it, even from here, the difference in how it breathed. Cities have a feeling, a mood that rises off them like heat. This one felt tighter than I remembered, held in, afraid. The kind of afraid that doesn't announce itself loudly, that hides in curfews and checkpoints and neighbors who stop making eye contact with each other. I didn't go in on the first night. I needed to know what I was walking into before I walked into it, so I watched. I circled the city at altitude, high enough that I was a shape against the stars no more. And I listened with ears that could pick up a whispered conversation from 300 meters. What I heard in the first hour told me everything I needed to understand about what Darian had built in my absence. The guard rotations had tripled. Checkpoints at every gate that hadn't existed before. Papers, faces, names recorded. The kind of apparatus you build when you're afraid of your own city. The market district, which had always run until well past dark, went quiet at the second evening bell. Not from choice, from curfew. I could hear the patrols enforcing it. In a tavern near the eastern wall, 2 men whispered about someone called the Pale Collector. Darian's head of intelligence, a man whose methods had made even the palace guard uncomfortable. In a house near the merchant quarter, a woman told her daughter in a low, fast voice what to say if the collector's people came to the door. What to admit to. What to deny. What to pretend not to know. I had been gone 53 days. In 53 days, my brother had turned our city into something that made its own people rehearse their cover stories before bed. The fire in my chest, the colder, more precise version, did something I hadn't felt it do before. It didn't flare, it focused. Like lens finding the sun. I landed back in the hills and sat in the dark. I had come back for Darian. Then I'd corrected that to something larger. Now I was correcting it again, making it specific. But what I had heard tonight made it more specific than either of those things. It made it about the woman teaching her daughter what to say if the wrong people knocked on the door. That woman deserved better. That daughter deserved better. The men in the tavern, speaking in whispers about something that should have been safe to say aloud. They deserved better. Personal and much larger. Those two things had always been the same. I just couldn't see it until I was sitting on a dark hillside, listening to a whole city breathe wrong. I just hadn't been able to see it clearly until I was sitting on a dark hillside, listening to a whole city breathe wrong. On the second day, I found someone I trusted. Her name was Mira. She had run the household accounts for my father for 20 years, and she was the most rigidly honest person I had ever known. Still the same house near the south gate, shutters open in the cold. She thought closed shutters were a moral failing. Same herbs, same window boxes. Some people are bedrock. I had no human form. I couldn't knock. So I landed in the alley before dawn and waited. When she came out in the gray light, I made the 2-note whistle I'd used since age 12. She went completely still. Then, without looking up, she said in a voice so controlled it almost didn't shake, "That's not possible." She went completely still. Then, without looking up, said in a voice so controlled it barely shook, "That's not possible." "It's a long story," I said. She looked up at me then. Her expression moved fast through shock, grief, and something that looked like fierce, concentrated relief. Then she said, "How? Never mind. Later. What do you need?" That was Mira. 20 years running my father's accounts. The most rigidly honest person I had ever known. I had missed her more than I realized until that moment. What I needed was everything she knew about what had changed. She gave it to me in a low, fast, precise voice, not like she had been saving it up for exactly this conversation. Darian had moved faster than anyone expected. 2 weeks after my death, 3 council members who might have questioned him were gone. 1 dead, 1 exiled, 1 simply not seen anymore. The Pale Collector, real name Savan, a minor functionary I had always found faintly unsettling, had been given authority that made the palace guard answer to him instead of the reverse. And the 4 men who killed me had been rewarded. Promoted, titled, comfortable, utterly certain that what they had done was permanently safely behind them. I noted that carefully. "People aren't just uncomfortable," Mira said. "They're frightened. The curfews, the disappearances, not many, but enough that everyone knows someone who knows someone." I noted that. I noted all of it. The fire in my chest burned steady and cold while I listened, cataloging, organizing, turning information into plan. "How many people know I'm dead?" "Everyone," she said. "Darian announced it. A tragic training accident. Very dignified funeral." She paused. I attended. I sat in the back. I did not cry. Something warm moved briefly through the fire. "Good," I said. "He built a memorial," she added, tone making her opinion entirely clear. "Of course he did," I said, and I meant nothing kind by it. The fire in my chest noted the 4 men, their promotions, their titles, their comfort. It burned steady and cold while I listened, cataloging, organizing, turning information into plan. By the 3rd day I had 1 concrete plan. Not subtle. Subtlety was never my strongest skill, and I had less patience for it now than I used to. But it had to be the right moment. Not just storming the fortress. That would work, but it would break things that didn't need breaking. I had come back for the woman rehearsing cover stories with her daughter, not just for Darian. There was a public audience in 4 days, a monthly tradition my father had kept for 30 years. Gates open. Any citizen could bring a petition directly to the ruler. Darian had kept the tradition. Of course he had. Good optics. Accessibility that cost him nothing as long as the Pale Collector's people screened every petitioner beforehand. The right moment was public, large, unmissable. A moment where everyone saw what was happening and understood what it meant. 4 days. I didn't need a battle plan. I needed something closer to theater, controlled, purposeful, with exactly the right impact, at exactly the right moment in front of the right people. Darian had kept the tradition. Of course he had. It was good optics. A gesture of accessibility that cost him nothing as long as the Pale Collector's people screened every petitioner beforehand. By the 4th night, I knew the guard positions, the hall layout, every exit Darian would use. And one thing I hadn't known to look for until Mira mentioned it, almost as an afterthought. I spent those 4 days in the hills above the city, and Mira spent them gathering information I needed, leaving notes in a hollow in the wall behind her herb garden that I could read from above. 3 of the 4 men who had killed me would be at the audience, standing near the throne, part of the honor guard, visible, entitled, safe. The fire in my chest went absolutely still. 3 of the 4 men who had killed me were going to be at the audience, standing near the throne as part of Darian's honor guard, where they always stood now, visible, entitled, safe. The day of the audience was cold and clear. Winter sky, brilliant blue, the kind of light that makes everything sharper. The gates opened at mid-morning. Citizens filed in and were processed. The day of the audience was cold and clear. Winter sky, brilliant blue, the kind of light that makes everything look sharper. The gates opened at mid-morning. Citizens filed in. The day of the audience was cold and clear. Winter sky, brilliant blue, the kind of light that makes everything look sharper and more real than usual. Darian sat on the throne my father had built, looking every bit the part he had spent years rehearsing for. The 3 men stood near him. Seven watched the room with pale, moving eyes. Saban felt something wrong about 7 minutes before it arrived. I watched his posture change, a tiny tightening, and I watched him scan the sky through the high windows. Seven, the pale collector, stood to the side, watching the room with pale eyes that moved constantly, cataloging faces, reading the room for anything that shouldn't be there. He looked directly at me once, without knowing what he was looking at. Then the audience hall doors opened. Not violently. Steady pressure, inevitable, and then open. I filled the doorway. Fire visible under every feather, even in daylight. Not wild, just present. Something ancient, standing in a room built by much younger things. The room went still. Not violently. They opened the way doors open when something very large has decided they're not a barrier anymore. Steady pressure, inevitable, and then open. I filled the doorway. Fire visible under every feather, even in daylight. Not wild, not threatening, just deeply present. Something ancient, standing in a room built by much younger things. Everyone understood this was not a threat the way swords are threats. Something different. Something that operated on an older scale. Older than the building it was standing in. I looked at Darian. He looked at me. The whole room held its breath in the space between us. He went through fear, then control, then calculation, all in about 3 seconds. Darian stood up from the throne. I watched his face go through several things rapidly. Fear first, pure animal, honest, real. Then control snapping down over it. Then the beginning of calculation. He was trying to figure out what this was and how to spin it before he even finished processing that it was real. That was my brother, exactly as I had always known him. The 3 men near the throne had gone completely rigid. They knew. Not what I was, they couldn't know that. But they knew something was wrong in a way that was specifically aimed at them. I let the fire open. Not outward, not destructive, just visible. Every feather lit. Amber and white light filled the hall the way sunrise fills a room. Gradual, total, inescapable. And I said, in a voice that carried to every corner, "You should have checked for a pulse." The silence that followed was the most complete silence I had ever heard in my life. And I said, in a voice that carried to every corner of every corridor in that building, "You should have checked for a pulse," Darian said, voice perfectly controlled. "What is this creature and who sent it?" And I said, "You buried me in the memorial garden." Very flattering inscription. You spelled beloved correctly. Then Darian said, voice perfectly controlled, almost impressively so, "What is this creature and who sent it?" And I said, still in the same voice, completely steady, "You buried me in the memorial garden. I've seen it." Very flattering inscription. You spelled beloved correctly, which surprised me. That was when his control cracked. Just slightly. Just enough for the room to see it. And the room began to understand what it was witnessing. I felt the realization move through the crowd. The room began to understand what it was witnessing. I could feel it move through the crowd. Confusion, disbelief, and then something louder than either, rising fast. What happened next happened quickly. Saban moved first. Professional, fast, already drawing the weapon at his side before most people had finished processing the situation. Steven moved first. Professional, fast. The bolt hit my wing and healed before he could reload. He looked at that, looked at me, and stopped. He was practical. That was probably wise. The 3 men near the throne made 3 choices. One ran immediately for a side exit. One drew his weapon. The third went completely still, the stillness of a man who knows any move is wrong. Darian said in a voice now showing the first real fractures in his composure, "Subdue it, whatever it takes." And I said, "You can try or you can listen. Those are the only 2 options currently available. I would recommend listening. The other one ends badly and makes a lot of mess." The guard with a drawn weapon looked at Darian, looked at me, looked at where the bolt had hit and already healed. He made a decision I considered wise and put his weapon away. Darian was still calculating, still looking for the angle that would let him spin this. I had watched him do that my whole life. He was very good at it, but there was no angle here. But he had never been in a situation quite like this one. There was no angle. There was no version of this where he got to reframe what was happening for the audience, still frozen in the hall. There was no version of this he could reframe for the audience, frozen in the hall. They had all seen. And what they had seen was standing there, lit like sunrise, specifically addressing their ruler. "The people in this room," I said, not to Darian, to the room, "deserve to know what happened to the previous heir." "The people in this room," I said, not to Darian, to everyone, "deserve to know what happened to the previous heir." And I told them, not everything, just the facts. The 4 men, the room, the blade, the 4 men now standing in this hall as honored guards, the announcement of a training accident, the memorial. I watched Darian's face while I talked. I watched him try every tool he had. Authority, confidence, the practiced gravity of a man who believed he was supposed to be obeyed. None of them worked. Not here, not now. Not in front of a room full of witnesses standing in light that made lying feel like the wrong thing to do. I watched Darian's face while I spoke. Every tool he had, authority, gravity, the manner of a man who expected to be obeyed, failed him one by one. None of it worked here. Then Councilmember Ressa, older woman, voice like a carried bell, said clearly, "I want the prince's account of that night, in full, before this assembly, today." The room agreed. And the room agreed. Not with words. with the kind of weight that rooms carry when everyone in them has made the same decision at the same time. Darian looked at me one last time. The calculation was gone. What was left underneath it was the face of someone who understood the story they had been telling was over. I held his gaze and said nothing. I had already said what I came to say. The rest of it belonged to the room, to the council, to the people who lived under this roof and breathed this wrong air. The rest of it was not mine to do. These were his people, his council, his city. The correction that was coming was theirs to make, not mine to impose. I was not a king, and I was not a weapon in anyone's hand. I was something that had come back to put a truth in a room and let the room decide what to do with it. That was enough. I was not a king and not a weapon. I was something that had come back to put a truth in a room. What the room did with it was theirs to decide. I left the same way I came, through the audience hall doors, into the cold, brilliant morning rising above the city on wings that caught the winter light. Below me, I could already hear it beginning. Voices, movement, the sound of a city starting to recalculate everything it had been told for the past 53 days. Mira was in her garden when I passed over. She looked up. I made the two-note whistle. She pressed one hand to her chest, her version of everything she couldn't say, and looked back down. I rose higher. The city got smaller. The hills I had trained on as a boy were just ridges from up here. The fortress, just a cluster of old stone among other old stone. It looked permanent from the ground. From up here, it looked like everything else, a thing made by people, lasting as long as things made by people last, no longer. I turned south, not for any specific reason, just because the fire in my chest didn't point anywhere in particular anymore, and south felt like open country, and open country felt right. There was a great deal of this world I hadn't seen. Ash had shown me centuries of its history, and what it had made me feel was not satisfaction, but curiosity. What else was out there? What other things like Sable and Thresh and Ven were living in the old places, waiting? What didn't have a name yet? What was this world hiding in its oldest corners, patient as stone? I had been reborn for a reason. I still didn't know if it was one reason or many. The audience hall felt like one thing completed, not the whole of it. The fire burned steady and cold in my chest, and I flew south into open sky, and I was something the legends didn't have a word for yet, and that felt exactly right. Something tells me this isn't the last throne room Kale is going to walk into. If you want to find out what comes next, you know what to do. I had been flying south for 3 days when I found the second city. Not my city, not anything I recognized. Smaller, older, built into a cliff like it had grown there. Not my city, not anything I recognized. Smaller, older, built into the side of a cliff the way birds build nests, like it had grown there rather than been constructed. And it was burning. Not the whole city, not yet. But the smoke from the eastern quarter was the color of something that had been going for hours and wasn't stopping on its own. Not the whole city, not yet. But the smoke rising from the eastern quarter was the specific color of something that had been burning for a while and wasn't going to stop on its own. I circled at altitude, reading the pattern the way Ash had taught me. Not just what I could see, but what it meant, where the fire was moving, what was running toward it. What was running toward it was soldiers, not the city's own guards. The colors were wrong, the formations too organized for a local force. Someone had sent an army to this city. Someone was taking something that wasn't theirs. I knew that particular situation. I had some personal experience with it, actually. Recent, very specific experience. What happened next I will describe simply. I put the fire between the army and the city and held it there until they decided they had somewhere else urgent to be. What happened next I will describe simply. I put the fire between the army and the city, and I held it there until the army decided it had somewhere else urgent to be. The descent was fast, faster than it would have been a month ago, faster than anything that size had any right to be. The soldiers in the eastern quarter didn't see me until I was already there. What happened next I will describe simply. I put the fire between the army and the city, and I held it there until the army decided it had somewhere else to be. It did not take long. There is something about a phoenix standing between you and what you want to burn that clarifies decision-making faster than almost anything else. There is something about a phoenix standing in the gap between you and the thing you want to burn that clarifies decision-making considerably. I watched them go. I held the line until they were past the ridge and out of sight. Then I landed in the street and folded my wings and waited. The city was called Veth. I learned that from a man named Karos, who came out of a doorway holding a bucket of water and a look of complete bewilderment. He was about 60, with working hands, and the look of a man trying to figure out which part of a very large problem to address first. His priorities, it turned out, were exactly right. "Are they gone?" he asked. "Not are you dangerous. Not what are you. Just, are they gone?" His priorities were correct. "Past the ridge," I said. "They won't be back today." He nodded slowly, set the bucket down, looked at the smoke still rising from the eastern quarter. "We've been holding them off for 9 days," he said. "We weren't going to make it to 10. He looked at me. "What are you?" "Something that was passing through," I said. He accepted that with the equanimity of a man who had been under siege for 9 days and had run out of capacity for surprise. "Well," he said finally, setting the bucket down and looking at the smoke still rising from the eastern quarter. "Thank you for passing through when you did. Simple, clean, enough." Over the next hour, more people emerged. The way they moved through damaged streets, careful, checking, the efficiency of people who had been managing crisis for days, I recognized it. Not people waiting to be saved. They had been fighting, making decisions, rationing resources, holding a line. They just needed it held a little longer than they could manage alone. I stayed 2 days, not because anyone asked. Because there was work and I had capacity, and Ash had spent a long time showing me what happened to places that didn't get help in time. I helped clear damaged structures, provided light when work ran into night, scared off 3 scouting parties, which communicated clearly that Veth was no longer an easy target for anyone. Karos fed me, which, given my size, was a significant commitment on his part, and I told him so. He waved this off. "You kept us alive," he said. "The least we can do is keep you fed." On the second evening, Karos asked where I was going. "South," I said. Not entirely sure what I was looking for, only that the fire had a direction, and I had learned to follow it. He nodded like that made complete sense. "Things find their purpose by moving," he said. "My father used to say, a fire that stays in one place burns out. A fire that travels becomes something." "A fire that stays in one place burns out," he said. "A fire that travels becomes something." I thought about that for a long time after I left. It felt truer than he probably knew. South became southeast, then east. Then, one morning, just northeast. A sharp correction that made me circle twice because it felt so certain. The pull in my chest had changed since the crossing. In the other world, it pointed home like a compass. Here it had become more complex, adjusting, following something moving rather than fixed. I didn't question it. I stopped questioning the fire around week 3 of training. It had not led me wrong yet. What it led me to, 2 weeks after Veth, was a mountain I recognized. Not from this life, but from what Ash had shown me on the plateau. This mountain appeared across centuries of that history. Not from this life. From what Ash had shown me, from that flood of memory and history on the plateau. This mountain appeared in several of those images, at several different points across centuries. It was a place that things kept coming back to, and at the base of it, gathered around a cold fire that had been burning until recently, were 4 creatures I had never seen, and one I had. The mountain had a name in the old language that roughly translated to "where the old things meet." I was willing to believe that, because at the base of it, arranged around a cold fire that had clearly been burning until recently, were 4 creatures I had never seen before, and one I had. Sable looked up at me as I landed, silver eyes steady, and said, "I wondered if you'd find this on your own or if we'd have to come get you." "You could have told me where to go," I said. It looked up at me as I landed, with those silver eyes, and said, "I wondered if you'd find this or if we'd have to come get you." "You could have just told me where to go," I said. "When?" it asked. "Before the crossing or after?" I considered that. Fair point. The 4 other creatures regarded me with varying degrees of interest. One of them, tall, angular, made of something that looked like solidified shadow, said something in a language I didn't know. Sable translated, "It says you smell like someone who has recently done something irreversible." I looked at the shadow creature. "Twice," I said. It made a sound that might have been acknowledgement. Sable looked up as I landed. "I wondered if you'd find this alone or if we'd have to come get you." "You could have just told me where to go," I said. "When?" it asked. Fair point. The cold fire wasn't cold anymore. It responded to my proximity, and the other creatures moved closer to the warmth. Some things recognize fire the same way fire recognizes them. "What's coming?" I asked. Sable looked at me steadily. "Do you remember what I told you in the basin about the barrier between this world and others?" I remembered. The question of whether the barrier would fall. The shared certainty that it was not permanent, just a matter of when. I remembered Sable saying they'd been preparing for worse. "It's starting," Sable said simply. "Not here, not yet. But the edges are thinning. Things from other places are already beginning to come through in small numbers." "Is the army at Veth connected?" I asked. Sable tilted its head. "Possibly. Disruption at the edges creates pressure everywhere. Animals move when territory destabilizes. Armies do too." The shadow creature said something else. Sable translated, "It says the thinning has a location. A place where it's furthest along. Where it will break first if it breaks." "Where?" I asked. The shadow creature that had watched the last breaking answered first, in its low, grinding language. Then Sable translated, and I felt the fire in my chest go very still. 3 weeks east. A place that didn't appear in any of the history Ash had shown me, which meant either it was new, or it had been deliberately kept out of what I was shown. Neither comfortable. "What happens when it breaks?" I asked. "All of them." The shadow creature answered at length. The braided water creature answered. 2 others spoke at once, overlapping, and Sable's expression shifted. The summary Sable gave me was, "It depends on what comes through, and in what numbers, and whether the things on this side are ready." That was not a reassuring summary. Through Sable, the shadow creature described the last breaking. Not immediate catastrophe. The first things through were curious, explorers. The hostility only came later when they reported back. I stayed at the mountain for 5 days, learning context I didn't have, the history of the barrier, what had been wearing it thin, and what the things on the other side would likely want. Sable gave me the summary. Depends on what comes through, and in what numbers, and whether the things on this side are ready. I looked at the cold fire that wasn't cold anymore, burning steady between us in the dark at the base of an ancient mountain. The shadow creature, the only one of us who had witnessed the last breaking, had described it through Sable. Not catastrophe, immediately. The first things through were curious. Explorers. The hostility came later, when the curious ones reported back, and the powerful ones decided what they wanted. The interval between first crossing and organized pressure, that was the window. How long is the window? The answer, translated, last time, 40 years. But last time the barrier had failed slowly over centuries. This time it was thinning fast. Maybe 5 years. Maybe less. 5 years. Either a long time or almost nothing, depending on what needed to be built inside it. I thought about Veth. About Karos and his 9 days in the line that was almost gone. The shadow creature, whose name translated approximately as the one who watched the last breaking, had been present the last time a barrier like this had failed. It was the only one of us who had. I thought about the woman teaching her daughter what to say at the door, about a city that learned fear in 53 days, about what the right 53 days could also build. The interval between first crossing and organized incursion, that was the window. That was the time to build something that could hold when the organized pressure started. The things that survived pressure weren't the most powerful ones. They were the connected ones. People who knew each other, trusted each other, held the line together when it needed holding. The silence that followed was the kind where everyone knows the answer is complicated. Then Sable's eyes shifted, something close to anticipation. That, it said, is a more interesting problem. I need to go back, I said. Not to my city, to the other world, to the basin, the plateau, to Ash. Things there should be part of this. They understand what's coming better than anything here. I thought about the woman teaching her daughter what to say if the wrong people knocked on the door. In a city that had learned to be afraid in 53 days, I thought about what Ash had shown me, all those centuries of the same story, the same mistakes, the same collapses, and the pattern that ran through all of them. Sable regarded me. The crossing only works one direction, it said. You know that. I know, I said. I'm not crossing back. I'm asking if there's a way to bring them through to this side. The silence that followed was the kind where everyone knows the answer is complicated, but no one wants to be the first to say how complicated. Then Sable said, "That is a more interesting problem." Sable listened without interrupting. When I finished, it went quiet. Then, "You understand this is not a small thing?" "I know," I said. "It might take the rest of my life." Sable's eyes shifted. I was born in one world, trained in another. I had stood in the crossing and felt it take something from me and give something back. I understood doors the way most things on either side never would. I'm going to tell you the honest version of what I was, a second son. Trained hard, trusted the wrong people, died on a cold floor on a Tuesday. Nobody's main character, the reliable one. The silence that followed was a specific kind of silence, the kind where everyone in it knows the answer is complicated. I came back as fire that remembered being a man, crossed worlds, lost what I was carrying, stood in a throne room, said 7 words, and then I kept going because that's apparently what I do. I will tell you what I told Sable, because it is the same thing I now believe. Not as a plan, not yet, but as a direction. Sable listened without interrupting, and when I finished, it was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You understand this is not a small thing?" "I know," I said. "It might take the rest of my life." What comes through a door depends on who opens it, and how, and whether anyone is standing on both sides of it with an understanding of what the opening means. Something shifted in Sable's silver eyes. "Phoenixes," it said carefully, "don't have a natural end to their lives." I sat with that. The fire in my chest pulsed. Once, twice, then steady. I spread my wings above the ancient mountain. Fire steady and east like it always knew. Sable made its sound of agreement on low, brief, certain. I turned east and flew toward whatever came next. I'm going to tell you the honest version of what I was before all of this. A second son who trained hard and trusted the wrong people and died on a cold floor on a Tuesday. Nobody's story, the reliable one. The one in the middle who made himself smaller so someone else could be larger. I gave everything and got a blade in the back and a flattering memorial inscription. Then I came back as something ancient and burning. Crossed between worlds. Lost the part of me that knew how to miss home. Stood in a throne room and said 7 words that changed what came next. I'm not finished. The barrier is thinning. The old things are gathering. Something is coming that this world hasn't seen in a very long time, and I am apparently the hinge that holds the door. I did not ask for this. I asked only not to be murdered by people I trusted. The universe took that modest request and handed me something considerably larger in return. That seems to be how it works. Then it said, "Ash said the last one who came back with memory intact changed things considerably." I nodded. It also said it hadn't happened in a very long time. Sable looked at me steadily. But here is what I have learned. The things you don't ask for are sometimes the things you were made for. I feel it the way I feel the fire. Not as a thought, not as a decision, as a fact. I sat with that. The fire in my chest pulsed. Once, twice, steady. The cold at the base of the ancient mountain pressed in from all sides. and the fire between us burned warm against it. The barrier is thinning. The old things have gathered at a mountain whose name means where old things meet. A world is about to change in ways that will touch every city, every person, every creature. 3 weeks east, to the place where the barrier is thinnest, to stand at the edge of what's coming. Not afraid, not finished, not even close to finished. I spread my wings above the ancient mountain, and the fire burned steady and sure and east, like it always knew this was where we were going. I looked down once at Sable, still sitting at the base of the mountain in the cold morning, watching me rise. It made its sound of agreement, low, brief, certain, and I flew toward whatever came next, not knowing what it was, not needing to know, the fire steady in my chest, pointing the direction it had always been pointing before I was ready to follow it. That's part 4. Drop a comment. Do you think Kale is ready for what's waiting at the barrier? I'm not sure he is. And honestly, that might be the whole point. I was made for this. I feel it the way I feel the fire. Not as a thought, not as a decision, as a fact. The kind that doesn't ask permission. 3 weeks east, to the place where the barrier is thinnest, to stand at the edge of whatever is coming and figure out what it needs from me.